My name is Samantha Wright, and what should have been a simple family reunion turned into the most humiliating experience of my life. My cousins surrounded my 10-year-old Toyota in the parking lot, pointing and laughing at my poverty wheels, while flaunting their keys to luxury cars they could barely afford. They didn't know that 3 months later, every single one of their leases would be terminated, their credit scores in shambles, and their family business under new management, mine. They called it harmless teasing. I called it the wake-up call. That changed everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The security camera footage shows a woman in her mid-30s sitting behind a massive mahogany desk. Her hair is pulled back in a sleek ponytail, designer glasses perched on her nose as she reviews quarterly reports. The executive office suite overlooks a sprawling luxury car dealership where gleaming vehicles catch the California sunlight. That woman is me, Samantha Wright, CEO of Wright Luxury Automobiles, formerly known as Turner Family Motors. It's strange how success changes people's perception. The same cousins who once mocked my sensible, paid-off Toyota now call me weakly, their voices tight with forced pleasantry as they ask about job openings, financing options, or family discounts. I keep their photographs in my drawer, not for sentiment, but as a reminder of where this all began. Every morning, I still drive that same Toyota to work. It has 187,000 miles on it now, a few more dings, but it runs perfectly, just like my company. The valets always try to park it around back, away from the Maseratis and Bentleys on the showroom floor. I insist it stays out front, next to my reserved parking sign. Samantha Wright, owner. The journey from that humiliating family reunion to this corner office wasn't an overnight success story. It was calculated, methodical, and perhaps a little ruthless. Qualities I learned from the Turner family themselves, though they never expected their lessons to be used against them. 5 years ago, I was a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley with a healthy portfolio, a modest condo in San Diego, and no desire to flaunt my wealth. I valued financial security over status symbols. My father, Uncle Robert's brother, had taught me that money should work for you, not define you. He passed away 2 years before the reunion, leaving me his old Toyota and the wisdom that kept me grounded while the Turner side of the family spiraled into a lifestyle they couldn't sustain. The Turners had always been the successful branch of the family, at least on the surface. Uncle Robert inherited a small luxury car dealership in La Jolla from his father-in-law and expanded it into Turner Family Motors, with 3 locations across Southern California. My cousins, Brad, Melissa, and Tyler, grew up surrounded by wealth and privilege. They measured success in Instagram followers and car price tags while I measured mine in investment returns and compound interest. Hadn't seen the Turners in years when the invitation arrived for Aunt Patricia's 60th birthday celebration. My mother insisted I attend, hoping to reconnect the scattered branches of our family. Family is family, she said, ignoring the fact that the Turners had barely acknowledged us after my father died. I almost didn't go. Something about the embossed invitation with its gold foil and request for cocktail attire felt like a performance rather than a genuine reunion. But my mother's hopeful expression convinced me. "Your father would want you to keep the family connection," she said. I relented, thinking the worst I'd face would be a few hours of superficial conversation about careers and relationships. What I didn't expect was the ambush in the hotel parking lot. I arrived at the Grand Del Mar precisely at 6, parking my well-maintained but decidedly ordinary Toyota Camry between a Porsche Cayenne and a Mercedes G-Wagon. As I gathered my purse and Aunt Patricia's gift, a tasteful cashmere wrap, I noticed my cousins gathered near the entrance. They hadn't seen me yet, but I recognized them immediately. Brad's carefully cultivated beard, Melissa's trademark blonde, highlights, and Tyler's perpetual smirk hadn't changed since our last reluctant encounter at a family wedding 3 years prior. I should have sensed the tension when they spotted my car, the way their expressions shifted from boredom to gleeful mockery. But I was naive enough to think that adults in their 30s had outgrown high school parking lot politics. I stepped out of my car, smoothing my simple black cocktail dress and raising my hand in greeting. That's when Tyler's voice carried across the parking lot. "Oh my God, is that Sammy driving Dad's old loan rejection special?" The laughter that followed was performative, designed to establish hierarchy within their circle. Brad pulled out his phone, pointing it at my car. "This is my story, our family charity. We really should start a GoFundMe for cousin Samantha." My cheeks burned as other guests turned to stare. Melissa sauntered over, her Christian Louboutins clicking against the pavement. She air-kissed my cheek, the scent of expensive perfume suffocating. "Sammy, sweetie, you know Brad could get you a deal on something from this century, right?" "We hate to think of you struggling." I forced a smile, years of corporate training kicking in. "The Toyota runs perfectly, actually. Paid off years ago." Brad dangled his keys to what I later learned was a leased Aston Martin. "That's what poor people always say. It's reliable." Meanwhile, life's passing you by while you're waiting for your antifreeze to warm up. It wasn't the insult that bothered me. It was the assumption, the complete misreading of who I was and what I valued. They saw a worn Toyota and constructed an entire narrative about my life, struggling, unsuccessful, worthy of their pity and mockery. What they failed to see was a woman who could buy their family business with her investment portfolio alone. We walked into the hotel ballroom. Their comments continued, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. References to my sensible shoes and budget handbag peppered their conversation. Each barb was followed by a patronizing, "But good for you, being so practical." By the time dinner was served, I had made a decision that would change all our lives. If the Turners wanted to judge my worth by material possessions, I would give them a lesson in what true financial power looked like. Not the leased cars and maxed-out credit cards that fueled their facade, but the calculated, patient accumulation of leverage and control. I raised my glass during Uncle Robert's self-congratulatory speech about family legacy and Turner family. Motors record year? My cousins mistook my smile for admiration. It wasn't. It was the beginning of a plan. The morning after Aunt Patricia's birthday party, I sat in my condo overlooking the San Diego coastline, still fuming from the previous night's humiliation. The Turner family's behavior had stripped away any illusions about reconnecting with my extended family. As I nursed my coffee, I pulled out my laptop and began what I initially told myself was simple curiosity: Turner Family Motors. Public financial records told an interesting story, one very different from Uncle Robert's boasts about record years and expansion plans. Their debt-to-income ratio was concerning. They'd leveraged the original La Jolla location to finance. The two newer dealerships, betting big on a luxury market that was becoming increasingly volatile. The newest location in Newport Beach was hemorrhaging money, with overhead costs nearly double the revenue it generated. I recognized the pattern. Immediately from my years analyzing failing businesses at Morgan Stanley, the Turners were maintaining appearances at the expense of sustainability. Those gleaming showrooms and my cousin's extravagant lifestyles weren't funded by profits. They were funded by loans, extensions, and increasingly desperate financing. What began as idle research quickly became something more focused. I wasn't just looking at their business. I was looking for vulnerabilities, points of leverage, opportunities. My phone rang, interrupting my analysis. It was my mother. "Samantha, how was the party?" Her voice carried that hopeful tone she always had when discussing family reconciliation. I hesitated, unwilling to burden her with the reality of how her nieces and nephews had treated her daughter. "It was illuminating," I said finally. "Did you reconnect with your cousins?" "Patricia sent me a message saying how lovely it was to see you." I stared at the financial spreadsheets on my screen. We definitely made an impression on each other. That's wonderful, honey. Family is so important, especially now that your father's gone. The Turners are our only real connection left. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother valued family above all, having lost her parents young and married into the complicated Wright-Turner dynamic. She saw my cousins through a lens of childhood memories. Brad with his missing front teeth, Melissa making friendship bracelets, Tyler following everyone around with a toy camera. She couldn't see the entitled adults they'd become. Mom, do you remember when Dad turned down Uncle Robert's offer to join the dealership? I asked suddenly. She sighed. Your father had his principles. He didn't approve of how Robert ran his business or treated his customers. He used to say, Bob sells the dream, not the car, and the dream always costs more than people can afford. Something clicked into place. Did he ever mention specific concerns about their business practices? Well, my mother hesitated. There was something about pressuring buyers into unnecessary warranties and financing options. Your father thought it was predatory. That's why he stayed in banking. He believed in helping people build wealth, not debt. After we hung up, I returned to my research with renewed purpose. This wasn't just about my wounded pride anymore. It was about my father's values. Values I'd inherited but hadn't fully appreciated until now. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The next day, I called in sick to Morgan Stanley for the first time in 5 years. Instead of analyzing other people's businesses, I spent the day creating a detailed picture of Turner Family Motors. I reviewed their corporate structure, loan agreements, and market position. I studied their customer reviews, noting patterns of complaints about high-pressure sales tactics, hidden fees, and poor service follow-up. By evening, I had compiled a comprehensive report that would have cost a consulting firm tens of thousands to produce. The conclusion was inescapable. Turner Family Motors was overextended, underperforming, and vulnerable to acquisition. One particularly interesting discovery was that their lender, Coastal Pacific Banking, was looking to reduce its exposure to luxury automotive businesses due to market forecasts predicting a downturn. They'd already declined to extend Turner's credit line for the struggling Newport Beach location, a fact Uncle Robert had conveniently omitted from his record-year birthday speech. 3 days after the party, I walked into Coastal Pacific's regional headquarters in downtown San Diego. I'd scheduled a meeting with Edward Harrington, their vice president of commercial lending, under the pretense of exploring investment opportunities. Harrington was initially dismissive. A woman in her 30s wasn't his typical high-net-worth client. His demeanor changed when I presented my portfolio and credentials. Morgan Stanley, impressive, he noted, studying my business card. What brings you to Coastal Pacific today, Ms. Wright? I understand you're looking to reduce your automotive lending exposure, I said directly, particularly in the luxury market. His eyebrows rose slightly. We're recalibrating our portfolio mix, yes. May I ask how this information factors into your investment strategy? I'm interested in acquiring a dealership group that I believe is currently overextended with your bank. Turner Family Motors. Harrington's professional mask slipped momentarily. Are you aware of Turner Motors? More than aware, I replied, sliding my analysis across his desk. I believe they're approaching a critical decision point with their Newport Beach location. Their cash reserves won't cover the next quarter's operational costs, and their inventory financing is coming due. They'll be approaching you for extensions within weeks. He studied my report, his expression shifting from skepticism to interest. This is remarkably detailed. I'm thorough when I pursue an opportunity, Mr. Harrington. And to be completely transparent, I have a personal connection to this situation. Robert Turner is my uncle. Understanding dawned in his eyes. A family business matter. A business matter involving family, I corrected. I believe Turner Motors has potential under the right management. Current leadership has prioritized expansion and appearances over fundamentals and customer relationships. Harrington leaned back, assessing me with new respect. What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Wright? I want to position myself as the solution when Turner Motors inevitably faces its financing crisis. I have the capital to acquire their debt and the expertise to restructure their operations. What I need is a partnership with Coastal Pacific to facilitate the transition. The conversation that followed laid the groundwork for everything that would happen over the next 3 months. Harrington couldn't legally share confidential client information, but he could theoretically advise me on hypothetical scenarios for dealership acquisition and debt restructuring. He could also connect me with the bank's asset management team, who specialized in transitioning distressed businesses to new ownership. As I left Coastal Pacific that afternoon, a text message flashed on my phone. It was from Melissa. Forgot to ask if you want Brad to look for something in your price range. We just got a used Lexus with only 80,000 miles. Might be perfect for you. I smiled as I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Let them laugh at my Toyota a little longer. Soon enough, they'd learn what my father always knew. True power isn't about what you drive, it's about what you own. And I was about to own everything that mattered to the Turners. 2 weeks after my meeting with Harrington at Coastal Pacific, I requested a formal leave of absence from Morgan Stanley. My supervisor was baffled. I'd never taken more than a week's vacation in 5 years, but my record granted me the flexibility. I explained I needed time to handle a family business matter, which wasn't entirely untrue. My next step required direct intelligence on Turner Family Motors operations. For that, I needed someone on the inside, someone with access, but without loyalty to the Turners. I found her in Diane Reeves, the comptroller who had worked at the original La Jolla location for 22 years. We met at a small coffee shop in Encinitas, far from any of the Turner dealerships. Diane was in her mid-50s, with shrewd eyes, and an air of contained frustration that spoke volumes. "Why exactly did you want to meet Ms. Wright?" she asked, stirring her tea. "Your message mentioned financial consultancy, but you were vague about the details." "I'm evaluating Turner Family Motors for potential acquisition," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "Given your position, I thought you might have valuable insights." Her eyebrows rose. "Acquisition? Robert would never sell. That business is his identity. Even if the alternative was bankruptcy?" Diane's expression shifted, caution giving way to curiosity. "You know something." "I know the Newport Beach location is underwater. I know inventory financing for all 3 dealerships is leveraged through the same credit line. I know customer satisfaction scores have dropped 15% in the last 2 years while employee turnover has increased 30%. I leaned forward. "What I don't know is why a professional like you has stayed during this decline." She sat back, studying me with new respect. "I've stayed because I remember when Turner Motors meant something. Robert's father-in-law built that business on honest deals and fair pricing. He treated his employees like family." Her voice hardened. "Robert turned it into a finance scheme. The cars are just bait for the real product. Overpriced loans and unnecessary add-ons." "And the next generation?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Diane's laugh was bitter. "Those 3? Brad manages sales at La Jolla, but manages is generous. He shows up at noon, takes 3-hour lunches, and spends most afternoons building client relationships on golf courses. Melissa nominally runs marketing, but her main qualification is having 50,000 Instagram followers. And Tyler," she shook her head. "They installed him as general manager at Newport after he flunked out of his 3rd attempt at business school. That location was struggling before, but he's run it into the ground." As she spoke, I could see the pieces falling into place. The Turners hadn't just created a financially vulnerable business. They'd created a morally bankrupt one that exploited customers and employees alike. What if there was a way to save the business but change its leadership? I asked. To return it to the values of the original founder? Diane studied me thoughtfully. You're not just any financial consultant, are you? You're family. Robert Turner is my uncle. My father was his brother. Recognition dawned in her eyes. James Wright's daughter. He came to the holiday parties years ago, before falling out with Robert. I nodded. My father had concerns about the business practices. It seems he was right to worry. James was a good man, Diane said. He understood that selling someone a car shouldn't mean selling them into debt they can't afford. By the end of our meeting, I had gained not only valuable intelligence but an ally. Diane agreed to provide regular updates on Turner Motors' financial situation, particularly any developments with their lenders. In return, I promised that when, not if, I acquired the business, she would have a central role in its restructuring. As weeks passed, my strategy evolved from opportunistic to surgical. Through Diane, I learned that Coastal Pacific had declined Turner Motors' request for additional financing. Uncle Robert was scrambling, approaching secondary lenders with increasingly unfavorable terms. The Newport Beach location had begun missing payments to vendors. Staff paychecks were delayed, explained away as banking errors. Meanwhile, my cousins remained oblivious to the impending collapse. Brad continued hosting lavish client events at La Jolla. Melissa documented her business trips to fashion weeks in New York and Milan. Tyler bought a new Maserati, parking it prominently in front of the failing Newport Beach showroom. The final catalyst came unexpectedly, through social media of all places. Melissa had posted a series of photos from a charity gala, including one that caught my attention. My 3 cousins posing next to my Toyota, which was evidently parked nearby. They had surrounded it with luxury cars from their inventory, staging a then and now mockery complete with hashtags like staunch rags to riches and family charity. The caption read, "Giving back is so important to us at Turner Motors." Thinking of starting a collection for poor cousin Sam, who's still driving this ancient relic. The wheels make the woman. Poverty wheels. The post had hundreds of likes from their social circle, with comments ranging from amused to outright derisive. Clients, employees, and apparently everyone in their orbit was now in on the joke. My supposedly pathetic financial situation, as evidenced by my practical car. I sat at my desk, staring at the post, a strange calm replacing the initial surge of anger. The timing was perfect. Their public mockery coincided precisely with their business's private unraveling. It wasn't just an insult, it was an opportunity. I reached for my phone and dialed Edward Harrington at Coastal Pacific. Mr. Harrington, it's Samantha Wright. I believe Turner Motors will be approaching you for emergency restructuring within days. I'm ready to present my formal acquisition proposal. His voice was professionally neutral. You have remarkable timing, Ms. Wright. I've just come from a meeting where that very situation was discussed. Not remarkable timing, I corrected. Careful. Planning. I'll send my proposal within the hour. After ending the call, I opened my laptop and began finalizing the document I'd been crafting for weeks. My offer was straightforward. I would assume Turner Motors' debt obligations and inject sufficient capital to stabilize operations, in exchange for controlling ownership of all 3 locations. The terms were fair but firm. Uncle Robert and his children would retain minority, non-voting shares. They could maintain their association with the business for appearance's sake, but operational control would transfer immediately to new management, with me as CEO as I prepared to send the proposal. One last message arrived from Melissa. Seriously though, Sam, let us know when you're ready to upgrade from that embarrassment on wheels. Family discount. I added the screenshot of their social media mockery to my presentation file. Not out of spite, but as evidence of the current management's priorities and character. Then I clicked send. The Turners had no idea that their public ridicule had just sealed their fate. They'd pushed me to a breaking point, not realizing I was positioned to break their entire world in return. The fallout was swift and devastating, for the Turners, not for me. 3 days after I submitted my proposal to Coastal Pacific, Uncle Robert received the call that would shatter his carefully constructed facade. His primary lender was calling in their notes. All extensions were canceled. Payment in full was due within 30 days, or foreclosure proceedings would begin on all 3 dealership properties. I wasn't in the room when he received this news, but Diane recounted it with journalistic precision. Robert's face had drained of color. He'd demanded to speak with the bank president, invoking decades of business relationship. When that failed, he'd resorted to threats of legal action. Finally, he'd begged for more time. None of it mattered. The decision had been made at levels far above the local branch manager. Turner Family Motors had been designated a distressed asset, and Coastal Pacific was cutting its losses. What Robert didn't know, couldn't know, was that the bank had already identified a preferred buyer. Me. The morning after Robert's devastating call, I received one of my own from Edward Harrington. "Your proposal has been accepted as the framework for moving forward," he informed me, his tone businesslike but with an undercurrent of approval. "The bank values your industry expertise and financial stability. We believe you represent the best opportunity for preserving the business while protecting our investment." "When can we begin the transition?" I asked, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the surge of vindication. "That's actually why I'm calling. Robert Turner has requested an emergency meeting with our executive team this afternoon. He's bringing his attorney. While we're not obligated to inform him of alternative arrangements at this stage, it might be beneficial for all parties if you were present." The implication was clear. Rather than allowing Robert to spend weeks pursuing futile financial alternatives or legal challenges, Harrington wanted to present my acquisition as the solution in one decisive meeting. "I'll clear my schedule," I said. Coastal Pacific's executive conference room projected exactly the image of conservative banking power it intended. Dark wood, subdued lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Diego skyline. I arrived 20 minutes early, reviewing my notes while Harrington briefed me on the attendees. When the door opened, Uncle Robert entered mid-sentence, his attorney struggling to keep pace. He stopped abruptly upon seeing me, confusion replacing his agitated expression. "Samantha? What are you doing here?" Before I could respond, Edward Harrington stepped forward. "Ms. Wright is here at our invitation, Mr. Turner. Please, let's all be seated. We have much to discuss." Robert's confusion deepened as he took in my presence at the banker's table rather than beside him as family. "I don't understand. This is a private financial matter concerning Turner Family Motors." "Yes," I agreed calmly. "It is." The next 90 minutes unfolded like a carefully orchestrated play. Harrington and his team laid out the stark reality of Turner Motors' financial position: unsustainable debt, declining revenues, and insufficient collateral for further extensions. Robert's attorney attempted several counterarguments, but each was methodically dismantled with documentation that Diane had helped me compile. Throughout this exchange, Robert kept glancing at me, his expression cycling through confusion, suspicion, and dawning horror as he began to grasp my role. When the bank executives had finished their assessment, Harrington turned to me. "Ms. Wright, would you like to present your proposal now?" I opened my portfolio and met my uncle's gaze directly for the first time. Turner Family Motors requires immediate recapitalization and operational restructuring. I'm prepared to assume all outstanding debt obligations and inject sufficient working capital to stabilize operations, in exchange for controlling interest. The blood drained from Robert's face. "You? You're trying to take over my business?" "I'm offering to save it," I corrected. "Under current management, foreclosure is inevitable. My proposal ensures the Turner name remains on the buildings. Your family maintains minority ownership, and most importantly, the employees keep their jobs." Robert's attorney leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear, but my uncle shoved him. away. This is absurd. She's my niece, for God's sake. She knows nothing about the automotive industry. On the contrary, Harrington interjected, Ms. Wright has presented a comprehensive 5-year business plan that addresses the key weaknesses in your current operation. Her background in financial analysis makes her exceptionally qualified to manage the restructuring. This is some kind of revenge, isn't it? Robert hissed at me. Because the kids teased you about your car? This is pathetic, Samantha. I removed a folder from my briefcase and slid it across the table. Inside were printouts of social media posts, dozens of them spanning years. My cousins mock not just my car, but my career, my clothes, my lifestyle choices. The most recent charity post was prominently featured. This isn't about revenge, Uncle Robert. It's about values. My father, your brother, understood that business success shouldn't come at the expense of ethics. Turner Motors was founded on principles of fair dealing and customer service. You've abandoned those principles, and your children never learned them at all. I closed the folder. But you're right that the social media posts were illuminating. They demonstrated that current management's priorities are fundamentally misaligned with the business's needs. While your children were mocking my poverty wheels, I was analyzing your company's financial statements. Which approach do you think better qualifies someone to lead a business through a crisis? Robert's attorney finally managed to make himself heard. Mr. Turner needs time to consider alternative financing options and review this proposal in detail. Of course, Harrington nodded. However, I should note that Coastal Pacific is not entertaining additional extension requests. The choice before you is Ms. Wright's offer or foreclosure proceedings, which would commence next week. When the meeting concluded, Robert remained seated as his attorney and the bank executives filed out. I gathered my materials unhurriedly, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. How long have you been planning this? He asked finally, his voice hollow. Since I realized the business that bears our family name had lost its way. I met his gaze. The mockery was just the catalyst that showed me how far the rot had spread, from business practices to personal values. You have no idea what it takes to build something like this, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the windows, toward his dealerships beyond. Your father didn't have the stomach for it either. My father had the integrity to walk away from something that compromised his values. I have the determination to transform it back into something worthy of our family name. I closed my briefcase. You have 48 hours to accept my offer, Uncle Robert. After that, I'll negotiate directly with the bank for post-foreclosure acquisition. The terms won't be as favorable for your family. As I walked to the door, he called after me. The kids were right about one thing, Samantha. You don't belong in our world. I paused, hand on the doorknob. No, I don't. I'm creating a better one. The next morning, Robert's attorney contacted mine with a single-word message. Accepted. Phase. One of my strategic response was complete. Now came the harder part, rebuilding what the Turners had nearly destroyed. News travels fast in tight-knit business communities, and the luxury automotive world of Southern California was no exception. By the time I arrived at the La Jolla dealership the following Monday morning, rumors had already spread among the staff. They gathered in small clusters, conversations halting abruptly as I walked through the showroom floor. Diane met me at the entrance, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask her satisfaction. Good morning, Ms. Wright. The management team is assembled in the conference room as requested. I nodded, straightening my blazer. Thank you, Diane. Is everyone present? Almost everyone. Her tone conveyed the exception without needing to elaborate. The conference room fell silent as I entered. Department heads from all 3 locations sat around the table, expressions ranging from curious to apprehensive. 3 chairs remained conspicuously empty, the seats that would have been occupied by Brad, Melissa, and Tyler. Good morning, I began, setting my briefcase on the table. For those who don't know me, I'm Samantha Wright. As of Friday, I've assumed majority ownership and executive control of Turner Family Motors, now Wright Luxury Automobiles. Murmurs rippled through the room. I raised a hand to quiet them. I understand this transition may feel sudden and concerning. Let me address your most pressing questions immediately. No, we are not closing any locations. No, there will not be mass layoffs. Yes, there will be significant operational changes. Relief visibly washed over several faces, though wariness remained. The next week, I'll be meeting individually with each department. I'm particularly interested in hearing from those of you who have been here longest, who remember the founding principles of this business before. I paused, choosing my words carefully, before recent management priorities took hold. A man at the end of the table cleared his throat. Ms. Wright, what about the Turner family? Will they still be involved in day-to-day operations? It was the question everyone wanted answered. I met his gaze directly. Robert Turner remains a minority shareholder and will serve in an advisory capacity during the transition. As for Brad, Melissa, and Tyler Turner, I glanced at the empty chairs. Their employment has been terminated, effective immediately. The reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a collective exhalation, as if tension had been released from the room itself. Later, I would learn that my cousins had been universally disliked by staff, known for taking credit for others' work, blaming employees for their own mistakes, and treating dealership resources as their personal property. Their personal items are being packed as we speak, I continued. Security will escort them to collect their belongings later today. They are not to access any company systems, documents, or facilities outside of that scheduled time. As the meeting progressed, I outlined my immediate priorities: stabilizing finances, reviewing compensation structures, and implementing ethical sales practices. When we concluded, I asked Diane to stay behind. They didn't show up for work today, she said once the room had emptied. None of them. Robert called them last night after signing the papers. I hadn't expected my cousins to face the music immediately, but their absence still disappointed me. Predictable, but unfortunate. Have their building access and system credentials been revoked? First thing this morning, Diane confirmed. Though there's something you should know. She hesitated. Tyler attempted to access the Newport Beach location around midnight. Security found him trying to remove files and a dealer demo vehicle. They escorted him off the property. I shook my head, unsurprised yet still dismayed. Document everything. If they're going to make this difficult, we need to be prepared. Difficult was an understatement. By mid-afternoon, my phone was bombarded with messages. From my mother, from extended family, even from mutual acquaintances expressing shock at my hostile takeover of poor Robert's family business. The narrative being circulated painted me as a vengeful outsider who had manipulated financial institutions to seize a thriving business from beloved family members. In this version, the Turners were victims of my calculated resentment, targeted simply because they had more success than I did. My mother called in tears. Samantha, what's happening? Patricia says you've destroyed Robert's life's work, that you humiliated the children and had them thrown out by security. This doesn't sound like you. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that she was hearing only the Turners' distorted version. Mom, the business was failing. Robert had driven it to the brink of bankruptcy with unsustainable practices. I invested my own money to save it, and everyone's jobs. But to take it from family? She trailed off, the conflict in her voice evident. Would you feel better if some corporate conglomerate had acquired it in foreclosure? If everyone lost their jobs? Because those were the alternatives. I softened my tone. I know this is hard to understand without the full picture. Robert is your brother-in-law, and you want to believe the best of him. But trust me when I say this was necessary. The conversation ended without resolution, both of us agreeing to discuss it further when emotions weren't so raw. It was the first of many difficult family conversations in the coming weeks. The most dramatic confrontation came 3 days into the transition. I was reviewing sales records in what had formerly been Robert's office when my assistant knocked. Urgently. Ms. Wright, your cousins are in the showroom demanding to see you. Security is trying to contain the situation, but they're causing a scene. I sighed, saving my work. Tell security I'm coming down. The scene that greeted me was exactly as theatrical as I would have expected from the Turner siblings. Brad stood in the center of the showroom, red-faced and shouting. Melissa filmed everything on her phone, clearly hoping to capture content that would support their victim narrative. Tyler paced aggressively near the entrance, intimidating customers who quickly retreated to their vehicles. There she is! Brad bellowed upon seeing me descend the stairs. The backstabbing cousin who couldn't stand that we were successful. I approached calmly, conscious of the employees and remaining customers watching the spectacle. This isn't the place for this discussion. If you'd like to speak privately— We don't need privacy, Melissa interrupted, her phone trained on my face. Everyone should see what kind of person you really are. Stealing from your own family because you were jealous of our lifestyle. I maintained a neutral expression, aware that her video would likely be edited and shared widely. The business was facing foreclosure due to financial mismanagement. I provided the capital to save it and the jobs it supports. If you'd like to discuss this maturely, I'm available to meet with your attorneys. Tyler stepped forward, his movement aggressive enough that security tensed. You think you can just walk in here and take everything we built? You don't know the first thing about running a dealership. Based on the Newport Beach location's performance under your management, neither do you, I replied evenly. His face contorted with rage. You smug bit, that's enough. I cut him off and my voice suddenly stopped. You have exactly 30 seconds to exit this building voluntarily, before security removes you, and we add trespassing charges to the financial audit already underway. The mention of a financial audit visibly startled them. Good, they should be concerned. The preliminary review had already uncovered personal expenses charged to company accounts, unauthorized bonuses, and inventory discrepancies that suggested potential fraud. As security escorted them out, Melissa turned back, her expression venomous. This isn't over, Samantha. You have no idea who you're messing with. She was wrong. I knew exactly who I was dealing with. What my cousins had never understood was that I had been watching and learning from their mistakes for years. They had taught me everything about what not to do. 5 years passed quickly when you were rebuilding a business from its foundation. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of my corner office as I reviewed the quarterly reports. Where once there had been red ink and alarming projections, now there were healthy margins and sustainable growth. Wright Luxury Automobiles had not only survived, it had thrived. My executive assistant, Marcus, knocked softly before entering with my morning coffee. The management team is assembled for the anniversary meeting, he reminded me. And congratulations again in 5 years. It's quite an achievement. I smiled, accepting the coffee. Thank you, Marcus. I'll be right there. The transformation of the business had been neither quick nor easy. The first year had been particularly challenging, as I implemented new sales practices that prioritized customer satisfaction over quick commissions. Several longtime salespeople had quit, unwilling to adapt to a model that didn't rely on high-pressure tactics and hidden fees. Good riddance. I had replaced them with professionals who understood that luxury car sales should be about building relationships, not exploiting them. We'd implemented transparent pricing, eliminated unnecessary add-ons, and created a customer experience that fostered loyalty and referrals. The financial restructuring had been equally demanding. The audit I'd mentioned to my cousins during their showroom tantrum had indeed uncovered significant irregularities. Brad had been using company funds to pay for personal vacations labeled as client entertainment. Melissa had created Shell, marketing companies that billed the dealership for non-existent services, funneling money back to herself. and Tyler had been selling demonstration vehicles under the table, pocketing the proceeds while reporting the cars as still in inventory. I'd turned all documentation over to Coastal Pacific and our corporate attorneys, who had pursued restitution, quietly but firmly. The Turner siblings had ultimately avoided criminal charges only by agreeing to surrender their remaining shares in the company and signing binding non-disclosure agreements about the circumstances of their departure. Uncle Robert had been a different story. Initially hostile, he had gradually shifted to reluctant acceptance as the business improved under my leadership. When I invited him to serve as a consultant on customer relations, leveraging his decades of industry connections while limiting his financial authority, he surprised me by accepting. Over time, our working relationship had evolved into something approaching mutual respect, though family gatherings remained awkward affairs. As I walked into the conference room for our anniversary meeting, I was greeted by the leadership team I'd carefully assembled over 5 years. Diane had been promoted to Chief Financial Officer, her decades of experience and unwavering integrity, making her the perfect steward for our restored financial health. James Chen, formerly a frustrated sales manager under Brad's chaotic leadership, now headed our sales division with a customer-first approach that had yielded record satisfaction scores. Maria Vasquez, recruited from a competing luxury brand, had revolutionized our marketing strategy, focusing on craftsmanship and experience rather than status and flash. Before we begin, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table, I want to acknowledge what we've accomplished together. 5 years ago, this company was weeks away from collapse. Today, we're the highest-rated luxury dealership group in Southern California, with expansion opportunities on the horizon. I gestured to the framed mission statement on the wall, the same one I'd crafted in those early, uncertain days. It read simply, "Excellence without compromise, integrity without exception." These aren't just words on a wall, I continued. They're the principles that saved this business. Each of you has embodied them in your work, and the results speak for themselves. The meeting proceeded with department updates and strategic planning for the coming year. As we concluded, Diane approached me with an unusual expression, somewhere between amusement and concern. "There's something you should see," she said, pulling up a social media post on her tablet. "Melissa Turner has been quite active online lately." The post showed my cousin standing next to a new luxury SUV, her smile wide but her eyes tight. The caption read, "So blessed to be driving my dream car. Self-made Chaz entrepreneur. Chaz women in business." I raised an eyebrow. Good for her. Though, I'm curious how she afforded it, given her current employment situation. Last I'd heard, Melissa was working as a brand ambassador for a mid-tier clothing line, her influencer status having taken a hit after the dealership scandal. Diane scrolled to show me the comments section. There, buried among the obligatory compliments, from Melissa's remaining social circle was a question from a former customer. "Isn't this the same model you mocked your cousin for not being able to afford? The one who now owns your family's dealership?" Melissa had deleted the comment, but screenshots had already circulated. The irony wasn't lost on anyone familiar with our history. Social media has a long memory, I noted, handing the tablet back to Diane. But we have more important things to focus on than Melissa's attempts to save face. Indeed, the Turner siblings had each followed predictable trajectories after their ousting. Brad had cycled through sales jobs at competing dealerships, never lasting more than a few months before his poor work ethic and entitlement issues led to termination. Tyler had attempted to launch a luxury car brokerage service, leveraging his family name, only to fold within a year when former Turner Motors customers refused to follow him. And Melissa had tried to rebrand herself as a business consultant, offering advice on family business succession planning, an endeavor that collapsed under the weight of its own irony. That evening, as I drove home in my now 8-year-old Toyota, still reliable, still paid for, I reflected on the journey. The car had become something of a legend among our staff. New employees were often told the story of how the owner of 3 luxury dealerships chose to drive the most sensible car on the lot as a reminder of what truly mattered in business. I'd had countless opportunities to upgrade, of course. Any vehicle in our inventory was at my disposal. Occasionally, I would drive a new model for a weekend to better understand our product, but I always returned to my Toyota for daily use. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle, about remembering where I'd come from and the values that had guided me when everyone around me was chasing status at the expense of substance. As I pulled into my driveway, a modest home by La Jolla standards, though certainly comfortable, my phone chimed with a message from my mother. Family dynamics had been strained after the takeover, but time had softened the initial shock. She had eventually come to understand that my actions had been necessary, even admirable. Saw the article about Wright Luxury in San Diego business. Journal, her text read. Your father would have been so proud of what you've built. Not just the success, but how you achieved it. I smiled, feeling a familiar warmth spread through my chest. That validation, the knowledge that I'd restored integrity to our family name, meant more than any luxury car ever could. The Toyota's engine shut off with a gentle purr. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to strengthen what we'd built. But tonight, I would simply appreciate how far we'd come from that humiliating day in the hotel parking lot, when my cousins had mistaken a practical car for a symbol of failure, never imagining it would become the emblem of their downfall and my most authentic success. The Charity Gala for Children's Hospital San Diego has become one of the highlights of my annual calendar. Wright Luxury Automobiles was a platinum sponsor, donating a percentage of each vehicle sold during the month-long campaign. This year, we'd also provided a limited edition sports car for the auction, which had generated significant buzz among potential donors. I adjusted my gown, midnight blue, with subtle beading, elegant but not flashy, as I circulated through the hotel ballroom. The venue was deliberately familiar. It was the same hotel where Aunt Patricia's disastrous birthday party had taken place 6 years earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, though I doubted anyone else would make the connection. Ms. Wright, the auction is about to begin, my assistant, Marcus informed me, appearing discreetly at my elbow. They'd like you near the stage for the car presentation. I nodded, excusing myself from a conversation with the hospital's chief of pediatrics. As I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and thanks from various board members, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Security personnel were speaking to a woman whose voice carried despite their attempts to keep the interaction quiet. Something in her entitled tone triggered immediate recognition, even before I could see her face clearly. Melissa. She hadn't aged well. 6 years of fading influence and financial struggle had left their mark. Her designer dress was from several seasons ago, her jewelry conspicuously costume rather than the real diamonds she once flaunted. Most telling was her expression, a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes, desperately projecting confidence she no longer possessed. I don't need an invitation, she insisted to the security guard. My family founded this event. Ask Samantha. Right, she's my cousin. The guard looked skeptical. Ma'am, all guests need to be on the list or have a valid ticket. Perhaps you could call Ms. Wright directly? That won't be necessary, I said, approaching them. I'll handle this, thank you. The guard nodded, clearly relieved to pass the situation to me. As he stepped away, Melissa's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, embarrassment, and finally a forced brightness. Sammy, I was just telling them we're family. This is all so silly. I must have misplaced my invitation. 6 years of success had granted me a serenity that her presence couldn't disturb. You weren't invited, Melissa. Why are you here? Her smile faltered but quickly reinstated itself. Don't be ridiculous. This is the Children's Hospital Gala. The Turners have attended for 3 generations. Yes, when Turner Motors was a sponsor. Wright Luxury Automobiles is the sponsor now. I kept my voice low, aware of curious glances from nearby guests. You know very well you're not welcome at company events. Company events? She laughed too loudly. This is a charity function, Samantha. Are you really so petty that you'd exclude family from supporting a good cause? I studied her for a moment, noting the desperation beneath her bravado. Melissa had always craved the spotlight and needed to be seen in the right circles. Being excluded from premier social events like this one must have been devastating to her carefully cultivated image. If you'd like to support the hospital, you can make a donation online, I said finally. Now, I need to return to my guests. As I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm with surprising force. Wait, I need to talk to you. It's important. It's about Brad. Something in her tone gave me pause. Despite everything, these people were still family, connected by blood, if no longer by trust or affection. You have 2 minutes, I said, leading her to a quiet alcove away from the main crowd. What about Brad? Melissa's composure cracked slightly. He's in trouble. Serious trouble. He took out loans using his car as collateral, but then he lost his job at Kensington Motors, and now they're repossessing everything. He's facing eviction from his apartment. I waited, sensing there was more to this impromptu visit than familial concern. He needs a job, Samantha. A real job with a decent salary. Her eyes flickered around the room, taking in the wealthy donors, the elegant decorations, the evidence of the success she'd once mocked. We were hoping you might consider bringing him back, in any capacity, even entry level. The audacity was breathtaking. You want me to hire Brad, after everything? It's been 6 years, she said, as if time alone could erase what they'd done. People change. Brad's different now. Humbled. He's learned his lesson. I doubted that very much. More likely, Brad had exhausted every other option in the automotive industry and was now desperate enough to approach the cousin he'd ridiculed, the business he'd helped nearly destroy. Even if I believe that, which I don't, Brad lacks the basic qualifications for any position in my company. He never developed actual skills because he was too busy coasting on the family name. Melissa's artificial veneer finally shattered completely. Fine. Be vindictive. Enjoy watching your family suffer while you sit in your perfect office with your perfect company. My company isn't perfect, Melissa. I just fixed what your family broke. I glanced at my watch. Your 2 minutes are up. Security will escort you out. As if on cue, the same guard appeared nearby, clearly having kept an eye on the situation. Melissa straightened her shoulders, attempting to reclaim some dignity. You know, everyone thinks you're so brilliant for turning the business around. But you just got lucky. The economy improved, the luxury market bounced back. Anyone could have done what you did. It was such a transparent attempt to diminish my accomplishments that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. If it was so easy, why did your father drive it to the brink of bankruptcy during the strongest bull market in decades? Why couldn't Brad maintain customer relationships despite having every advantage? Why did Tyler lose money at Newport Beach, month after month despite record industry sales? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. It wasn't luck, Melissa. It was work. It was integrity. It was treating people, employees, customers, even competitors, with respect instead of entitlement. Concepts your family never grasped. The security guard approached. Ms. Wright, is everything all right? Ms. Turner was just leaving, I said, maintaining eye contact with my cousin. She realized she has the wrong event, as Melissa was escorted. Toward the exit, she turned back, her expression hardening. This isn't over, Samantha. Tyler's been talking to some of your former customers. You wouldn't believe what they've told him about your ethical business practices. The threat was vague enough to be concerning, but not specific enough to address. Classic Turner tactic, creating uncertainty to undermine confidence. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of appearing worried. Goodbye, Melissa. Give my regards to Brad and Tyler. Returning to the gala, I pushed the encounter from my mind. The auction was starting, and we had raised over $300,000 for the Children's Hospital. That was what mattered tonight, not Melissa's desperate attempts to reclaim relevance or Brad's financial troubles. Yet, as I took my place near the stage, a small voice of caution whispered at the back of my mind. The Turners had always been most dangerous when cornered. And right now, they appear to be very cornered indeed. What exactly had Tyler been discussing with our former customers? And why choose this moment, after 6 years of silence, to emerge with vague threats? The auctioneer's voice boomed through the ballroom, but for the first time that evening, I found it difficult to focus on the celebration at hand. The first sign of trouble arrived 3 days after the charity gala. An email from our legal department flagging multiple negative reviews that had suddenly appeared across automotive forums and social media platforms. All followed a similar pattern. Claims of deceptive practices at Wright Luxury Automobiles. Allegations that we'd continued the same predatory tactics that had characterized Turner Family Motors. The timing is suspicious, Maria Vasquez noted, during our emergency management meeting. As marketing director, she monitored our online reputation with hawk-like vigilance. 15 negative reviews in 48 hours, all using nearly identical language. This is a coordinated attack. James Chen, our sales director, nodded grimly. I've received calls from 3 major clients asking about these reviews. Someone is making sure they see them. I leaned back in my chair, remembering Melissa's parting threat at the gala. Tyler's been talking to some of your former customers, she'd said. The pieces were falling into place. Find out who's behind this, I instructed Maria. Track IP addresses. Examine account creation dates, whatever it takes. In the meantime, respond professionally to each review. No defensiveness, just facts, and a request to discuss their concerns directly. Our technical team traced the reviews to several coffee shops and public libraries in San Diego, locations deliberately chosen to obscure the source. But the pattern was unmistakable. This was the Turners' attempt at revenge, precisely targeted. To undermine the reputation I'd spent 6 years building. The online campaign was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, a local business reporter contacted our office requesting comments on allegations from former management about fraudulent sales practices and employee mistreatment. The following day, an anonymous tip to the state regulatory board triggered a surprise inspection of our service departments. We weathered each attack calmly and transparently, providing documentation that refuted every allegation. The inspection found our service operations exceeded compliance standards. The business reporter, after reviewing our customer satisfaction metrics and employee retention rates, ultimately decided there wasn't a story worth pursuing. Still, I knew the Turners wouldn't stop with these initial probes. They were testing defenses, looking for weaknesses. The real attack was yet to come. It arrived in the form of a legal notice. Tyler Turner filing suit against Wright Luxury Automobiles for intellectual property theft, breach of contract, and unjust enrichment. He claimed that customer relationship strategies I'd implemented had been his original concepts, developed during his tenure at Newport Beach, but stolen during the ownership transition. The allegations were absurd. Tyler's customer relationship strategy had consisted primarily of comping drinks at nearby bars for potential buyers and promising unrealistic trade-in values. My approaches, transparent pricing, no-pressure consultations, and authentic follow-up were antithetical to everything the Turners had practiced. It's frivolous, our lead attorney assured me after reviewing the filing. There's zero supporting evidence, but responding will still require time and resources. Which is exactly what they want, I realized. They can't win, but they can distract us, cost us money, and potentially create bad publicity during the proceedings. The lawsuit confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't about winning legal battles. It was about forcing me back into their toxic orbit, making me engage with them on their terms. The Turners couldn't stand that I'd succeeded without them, that I'd built something better than they ever had. Rather than merely defending against their attacks, I decided to confront the source directly. I arranged a meeting with Uncle Robert at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in Del Mar, halfway between our respective homes. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. He looked older than his 68 years, the strain of diminished circumstances evident in his posture and expression. Yet he maintained that distinctive Turner pride as he slid into the booth across from me. "Samantha," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Thank you for meeting me, Uncle Robert." I signaled the waiter for coffee, giving us both a moment to settle into this uncomfortable reunion. "I assume you know why I requested this conversation." He stirred his coffee meticulously, avoiding my gaze. "My children are adults making their own decisions. I don't control their actions." "But you still influence them," I countered. "And you know this campaign they're waging is pointless. They can't win. Perhaps winning isn't the objective." A hint of the old Robert Turner emerged, calculating, strategic. "Sometimes the fight itself serves a purpose." "What purpose? Wasting resources? Damaging a business that still bears your family name, even if you no longer control it?" He set down his spoon with deliberate precision. "You took everything from them, Samantha. Their livelihoods, their identities, their futures. What did you expect? That they would simply disappear and applaud your success from afar?" "I expected them to learn from their mistakes and build something new," I replied evenly. "The way I did when they publicly humiliated me. The way anyone with actual resilience would." Robert's expression hardened. "My children were raised to be heirs, not entrepreneurs. They were supposed to inherit a thriving business, not start from nothing." "And whose fault is that?" I leaned forward. "You taught them entitlement instead of excellence, status instead of substance. You set them up for failure long before I entered the picture." A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps even regret, crossed his face before disappearing behind familiar stubbornness. "What do you want from this meeting, Samantha? To gloat? To threaten legal consequences if they continue?" "I want to propose a final resolution." I removed a folder from my briefcase and placed it between us. Inside is a settlement offer. 3 individual packages, 1 for each of your children. Each includes a one-time payment substantial enough to establish a new business venture or career path, in exchange for binding non-disparagement agreements and the dismissal of Tyler's lawsuit. Robert stared at the folder, but didn't touch it. "You're buying them off?" "I'm offering them what you never did. An opportunity to succeed on their own terms, without the shadow of Turner Motors hanging over them." I pushed the folder closer. "They have 2 days to accept. After that, we proceed to full legal defense, counterclaims for defamation, and if necessary, disclosure of the financial irregularities we discovered during the transition audit." His eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't. Those records were part of a confidential settlement, which your children have now violated with their coordinated attacks. Check the fine print, Uncle Robert. The confidentiality provisions become void if any party takes actions intended to damage the company or its reputation." We sat in tense silence, the weight of 6 years of family conflict condensed into this moment of decision. Finally, Robert reached for the folder. "I'll present it to them," he said quietly. "But I can't guarantee they'll accept." "That's their choice." I signaled for the check. Just like it was their choice to mock me 6 years ago, not realizing I had the capacity to build what they were destroying. As I stood to leave, Robert looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between resentment and reluctant respect. "You know, you're more like me than any of my own children," he said. "The difference is, you learned the right lessons. It wasn't exactly an apology or reconciliation, but coming from Robert Turner, it was an extraordinary admission. I nodded once in acknowledgement before walking away, hoping this would truly be the final chapter in a family conflict that had shaped my life in ways none of us could have anticipated. The morning air carried a hint of salt as I parked my Toyota in front of the La Jolla dealership. 7 years had passed since that fateful family reunion where my cousins had mocked this very car. Today, I'd finally decided it was time for a change. The main showroom gleamed in the early sunlight, our newest models arranged with tasteful precision. Several sales consultants were already preparing for the day, checking inventory details and reviewing appointments. They nodded respectfully as I passed, a few offering quiet good mornings. James Chen met me at the entrance to the pre-owned section, clipboard in hand and a knowing smile on his face. "Are you sure about this, Ms. Wright? It's practically a company. Mascot at this point." I ran my hand along the Toyota's hood one last time. "Everything has its season, James. Even loyal cars." After 7 years of faithful service post-takeover, 15 overall, my Toyota had finally reached the end of its practical lifespan. At 237,000 miles, repair costs were beginning to outweigh its remaining value. It was time to let go. "We've prepped the vehicle you selected," James said, leading me toward the far corner of the lot where, under a discreet covering, waited for my new car. Not a flashy luxury model as many might have expected, but a sensible, fuel-efficient hybrid, practical, reliable, and environmentally conscious. "The paperwork is ready whenever you are," he added. "Though I still think we should keep the Toyota as a showroom piece. New employees wouldn't believe the story otherwise." I smiled at the suggestion. The story of the Toyota that launched an empire had indeed become something of a company legend, embellished with each retelling. Some newer staff members were convinced I'd strategically driven a modest car to trick my cousins into underestimating me, a chess move planned years in advance. The reality had been far simpler. I'd valued financial prudence over status symbols, substance over appearance. That choice, mocked by those who prioritized image over integrity, had ultimately revealed character differences that proved decisive in business. "The Toyota has earned its retirement," I said. "But make sure it goes to a good home. Perhaps a first-time buyer who will appreciate its reliability." As James arranged for the vehicle exchange, I found myself reflecting on the 6 months that had passed since my confrontation with Uncle Robert. The settlement offer had produced unexpected results. Brad and Melissa had accepted immediately, eager for the financial lifeline and fresh start. Brad had used his payment to relocate to Phoenix, where he'd opened a modest classic car restoration shop focused on models from the 1970s, a genuine passion he'd always subordinated to his father's expectations. Melissa had invested in a small, public relations firm, leveraging her social media experience into a legitimate career path. Tyler, predictably, had initially rejected the offer, determined to pursue his lawsuit despite its flimsy foundation. 2 weeks of preliminary legal proceedings, and the accompanying legal bills, had finally convinced him of its futility. He'd accepted the settlement under protest, using the funds to launch a luxury car detailing service that, somewhat surprisingly, was building a positive reputation in Newport Beach. Uncle Robert had maintained his consulting role with Wright Luxury Automobiles, his experience proving valuable as we expanded into new markets. Our relationship remained professional rather than familial, but the open hostility had faded into something approaching mutual recognition, if not quite respect. My mother had perhaps undergone the most significant transformation. Initially torn between family loyalties, she had gradually come to recognize the truth about the Turners' business practices and treatment of customers. Witnessing the contrast between their approach and mine had helped her understand my father's long-ago decision to distance himself from his brother's enterprise. Last month, she joined our charitable foundations board, helping direct community outreach programs that extended our impact beyond the automotive industry. "Ms. Wright?" Marcus appeared at my office door, interrupting my reflections. "Your 10 o'clock is here," the automotive industry journalist from Business Insider. I nodded, gathering my thoughts. This profile had been months in the making, focusing on how Wright Luxury Automobiles had bucked industry trends by emphasizing ethical sales practices and customer relationships over volume and quick profits. The journalist Emma Reyes had a reputation for incisive questions and unfiltered reporting. She rose as I entered the conference room, extending her hand with a firm grip. "Thank you for making time, Ms. Wright. I've been looking forward to this conversation." "Likewise," I replied, gesturing for her to be seated. "Though I should warn you, our success story isn't particularly dramatic by industry standards. No miraculous innovations or disruptive technologies, just sound business principles consistently applied." Emma smiled. "Sometimes the most powerful stories are the simplest ones. Tell me, what first drew you to the automotive industry? It's still predominantly male-led, particularly in the luxury segment." "It wasn't a planned career path," I admitted. "I was a financial analyst with no intention of running a car dealership until circumstances revealed both a need and an opportunity." "The opportunity being Turner Family Motors' financial difficulties?" she prompted, glancing at her notes. "Records show you acquired controlling interest during a period of significant distress for the company." I considered my response carefully. The settlement agreements prevented detailed discussion of the transition, but the basic facts were public record. The previous management had prioritized expansion over sustainability, image over infrastructure. When financial realities finally caught up with those choices, I saw an opportunity to rebuild using different principles. Emma leaned forward, slightly. "And those principles came from outside the industry." "They came from my father," I said simply. "He believed that success built on exploiting others is inherently unstable. That integrity isn't just a moral choice, but a business advantage." The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering our sales approach, employee development programs, and community initiatives. Throughout our conversation, Emma kept returning to a central theme: how an industry known for high pressure, tactics, and consumer wariness had responded to our alternative model. "Your customer retention rate is nearly double the industry average," she noted toward the end. "What's the secret, especially in a market where luxury buyers have unlimited options?" I thought about the countless decisions we'd made over 7 years, the systemic changes and cultural shifts that had transformed the business. The answer, when I found it, was deceptively simple. We treat cars as what they are: well-engineered tools that serve a purpose, even luxury ones. Not as status symbols that define someone's worth or success. Emma studied me with renewed interest. "That's an unusual philosophy for someone selling vehicles that many people specifically buy as status symbols." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But we sell the craftsmanship, the engineering, the driving experience, not the envy they might generate, and our customers appreciate the difference." As the interview concluded, Emma asked one final question. "Your company has now surpassed the success of Turner Family Motors at its peak. Do you ever worry about repeating their mistakes? About prioritizing growth over values?" The question touched on a concern I regularly examined during strategic planning. Success created its own pressures and temptations. We've institutionalized our values into every aspect of operations, I answered. But more importantly, we remember where we came from. That old Toyota I drove for 15 years wasn't just transportation. It was a reminder that true value isn't about perception. It's about substance. After Emma left, I stood by the window overlooking our main lot, where customers were examining vehicles, talking with our consultants without the high-pressure atmosphere typical of dealerships. On the far side, almost out of sight, a young woman was completing paperwork on my old Toyota, her expression conveying the mix of excitement and nervousness that accompanied a first car purchase. The wheel had come full circle. What my cousins had mocked as a symbol of failure had become the foundation of something far more meaningful than they could have imagined. Not just a successful business, but a legacy of integrity that would outlast us all. The Business Insider profile exceeded all expectations. Emma Reyes had crafted a nuanced piece that captured not just our business model, but the philosophy behind it. The Right Way: How Substance Trumped Style in the Luxury Car Market became one of their most shared articles of the quarter, bringing national attention to what we'd built in Southern California. With this spotlight came both opportunities and challenges. Expansion offers poured in from investors and potential partners across the country. Wright Luxury Automobiles had proven that ethical practices could coexist with profitability in an industry not known for either. Everyone wanted a piece of what we'd created. On a crisp autumn morning, I convened our executive team to discuss one particularly compelling proposal: an opportunity to acquire a struggling luxury dealership group in Northern California, 5 locations that would essentially double our footprint overnight. "The financials make sense," Diane observed, reviewing the spreadsheets distributed around the conference table. "Their current management has overextended, much like the Turners did, but the underlying business is sound. With our operational model, we could turn them around within 18 months. James nodded in agreement. "The Bay Area market is prime territory. Demographic research shows customers there would be especially receptive to our transparent approach." I studied the proposed acquisition documents, feeling an odd sense of déjà vu. 8 years earlier, I'd sat alone in my condo analyzing Turner Motors' vulnerabilities, planning a takeover driven partly by principle and partly by justified anger. Now I was considering a similar move, but from a position of established strength rather than reactive determination. "If we do this," I said carefully, "we need absolute clarity on our motivations. Are we expanding because it aligns with our values and vision, or because success has created pressure to grow for growth's sake?" Maria, our marketing director, leaned forward. "It's a valid concern. Many companies lose their way during rapid expansion. The practices that made them special become diluted or abandoned entirely. Which is why I'd like to propose something unconventional," I replied. "Before we make this decision, I want each of us to spend a day working frontline positions in our dealerships. Sales floor, service department, finance office, wherever we can interact directly with customers and staff without executive filters." My suggestion was met with surprised but thoughtful expressions. It wasn't a typical approach to acquisition decisions, but we hadn't built our success on typical approaches. "We need to reconnect with what actually makes this company work," I explained. "Not the metrics or projections, but the human interactions that create our reputation. If we lose sight of that, no amount of expansion will matter." The following week transformed our perspective. Diane spent a day with our service technicians, witnessing firsthand how our transparent pricing model eliminated the tension typical in repair situations. James worked alongside a new sales consultant, experiencing the freedom our no-commission structure created to focus on customer needs rather than pushing for higher-priced vehicles. I spent my day in customer delivery, watching the moment when new owners took possession of their vehicles, their faces reflecting the trust we'd built through the process. When we reconvened to discuss the acquisition, our conversation had fundamentally shifted from market share and financial projections to how we could authentically extend our values-based approach to new communities. "I think we proceed," I decided finally, "but with modifications to the standard acquisition playbook. Instead of rapid integration, we implement a phased approach that prioritizes cultural alignment over immediate efficiency gains." The Northern California expansion would become our blueprint for responsible growth, deliberate, principled, and centered on our foundational values rather than arbitrary growth targets. We would prove that expansion didn't have to mean dilution. As plans progressed, I received an unexpected invitation. a grand opening celebration for Classic Revolutions, Brad's restoration shop in Phoenix. The elegantly designed card included a handwritten note. Wouldn't be possible without your intervention. Would be honored if you could attend. Brad. I studied the invitation, tracing the unfamiliar formality of my cousin's handwriting. This wasn't the Brad I remembered. Entitled, dismissive, quick to mock what he didn't understand. The settlement. Funds had given him a fresh start, but the humility to acknowledge my role in that opportunity suggested a more profound transformation. After careful consideration, I decided to attend. The 8-hour drive from San Diego to Phoenix gave me time to reflect on how completely our family dynamics had changed. The cousins who once looked down on me from their perceived position of superiority now occupy varied places in my wake. Some bitter, some grateful, all irrevocably altered by the consequences of their own actions and my response to them. Brad's shop occupied a converted warehouse in Phoenix's Arts District. The space was unpretentious but meticulously organized, with 3 classic cars in various stages of restoration. A modest gathering of automotive enthusiasts circulated around a 1967 Mustang displayed prominently in the center, his first completed commission. He spotted me almost immediately, hesitating briefly before approaching. Gone was the designer stubble and carefully cultivated, luxury lifestyle image. This Brad wore work clothes with actual evidence of work, his handshake firm but no longer performatively aggressive. Samantha. You came. His surprise seemed genuine. I wasn't sure you would. Interesting invitation, I replied. Hard to resist the curiosity factor. He nodded, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the shop. I owe you a proper thank you, and probably an apology that's about 8 years overdue. As we talked, I discovered that Brad's journey after leaving Wright Luxury Automobiles had been more complicated than I'd realized. He'd initially tried to leverage family connections to secure another position in luxury sales, but his reputation had followed him. Faced with actual unemployment rather than the manufactured hardship Melissa had described at the charity gala, he'd been forced to reevaluate his skills and priorities. I was useless, he admitted bluntly. All those years at Turner Motors, I hadn't developed a single marketable skill. I could talk about luxury cars, but I couldn't actually do anything valuable. His restoration business had started as a practical necessity, buying damaged classics with potential, teaching himself to restore them through online videos and community, college courses, then selling them for modest profits. The hands-on work had connected him to automobiles in a way his sales career never had. For the first time, I understand what these machines actually are, he said, running his hand along the Mustang's fender. Not status symbols or commission checks. They're engineering and art combined. Each one tells a story. As I prepared to leave, Brad walked me to my car, my new hybrid, which he noted with approval rather than derision. You know, we were idiots back then, he said suddenly, laughing at your Toyota. We thought we knew everything about success and value, but we didn't understand either. And now? I asked. He gestured back toward his modest shop. Now I'm building something real, something I created rather than inherited. It's smaller than what my father had, but it's mine, and it doesn't hurt anyone to make it work. Driving back to San Diego, I reflected on how profoundly things had changed. 8 years ago, a luxury car had been the ultimate symbol of success in the Turner family worldview. Now Brad had found fulfillment in restoring classics. I drove a practical hybrid despite owning multiple dealerships, and the true measure of achievement had nothing to do with what we drove at all. It was a reminder that legacies aren't built on appearances or possessions. They're built on values, choices, and the willingness to prioritize substance over style. A lesson my father had tried to teach his brother's family decades earlier, which had taken a full generational cycle to finally take root. 10 years after. The fateful family reunion that changed everything. I found myself facing an unexpected opportunity. The Women's Business Leadership Foundation had selected me as their Entrepreneur of the Year, with the award ceremony scheduled at the Grand Del Mar, the very hotel where my cousins had once surrounded my Toyota in the parking lot, laughing and taking photos of what they called my poverty wheels. The symmetry wasn't lost on me as I pulled into the familiar circular drive, now in my company's flagship electric luxury sedan. The valet, recognizing me from the event program, offered a respectful greeting as he took my keys. I paused for a moment, taking in the opulent facade that had once intimidated me. Now, it was simply another venue, no more impressive than the life I'd built through my own efforts. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed for the gala. 800 of California's most influential business leaders gathered at elegantly appointed tables, the stage framed by arrangements of white orchids and subtle lighting that highlighted the foundation's logo. At my designated table near the front sat my executive team, who had insisted on attending to celebrate this recognition. "Nervous?" Diane asked as I took my seat beside her. "Not about the award," I admitted. "But this place holds some complicated memories." She nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. Diane had been with me from the beginning, had seen the full arc of my journey from that humiliating day to this moment of public recognition. "Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor," she observed. "Or justice." As dinner progressed, I scanned the crowd automatically, a habit formed from years of industry events. Most faces were familiar from business circles, but one in particular caught my attention. Melissa, seated at a table near the back with what appeared to be clients or colleagues from her PR firm. Our eyes met briefly across the room. She offered a small, tight nod of acknowledgement before returning to her conversation. Not friendship, certainly not affection, but a grudging recognition that we now occupied the same professional world, albeit in very different positions within it. The foundation's president took the stage, beginning the awards portion of the evening. "Tonight's highest honor goes to a woman who transformed not just a company, but an industry's approach to ethics and customer relationships," she announced. When Samantha Wright acquired a failing luxury car dealership 10 years ago, industry observers predicted she would either conform to traditional high-pressure sales tactics or fail within a year. Instead, she created a third path, proving that integrity and profitability could coexist even in the most competitive markets. As I rose to accept the award, a beautiful glass sculpture symbolizing breaking through barriers, the audience's applause felt like vindication of every difficult decision, every principle I'd refused to compromise, every moment I'd chosen long-term value over short-term gain. "Thank you for this honor," I began, adjusting the microphone. "But this award doesn't belong just to me. It belongs to every employee of Wright Luxury Automobiles who embraced a different way of doing business when conventional wisdom said it couldn't work. It belongs to every customer who valued transparency enough to give us a chance to earn their trust. And in an unexpected way, it belongs to everyone who ever underestimated what could be accomplished by focusing on substance over style." I paused, scanning the audience. 10 years ago, in the parking lot of this very hotel, I was mockingly told that my practical, paid-off car represented failure. That true success meant leveraging yourself to project an image of wealth, regardless of the financial reality behind. It tonight stands as proof of a different definition of success, one built on sound decisions, ethical practices, and valuing people over appearances. The speech continued with appropriate acknowledgments and expressions of gratitude, but that opening, that subtle reference to the catalyzing moment, felt necessary to complete the circle that had begun in this same location a decade earlier. The reception following the ceremony, colleagues and industry peers offered congratulations. Several young entrepreneurs sought advice on maintaining values during growth phases. I was engaged in one such conversation when I felt a presence at my elbow. Turning, I found myself face to face with Melissa. "Congratulations," she said, her tone neutral but not hostile. That was quite a speech. Thank you. I studied her, noting the changes time had wrought. The ostentatious styling and aggressive status signaling had been replaced by a more subtle, professional appearance. I hear your PR firm is doing well, specializing in crisis management for tech companies? She nodded, surprised I'd kept track. Yes, turns out I'm good at helping people recover from public mistakes. Plenty of first-hand experience, I suppose. The moment stretched between us, laden with a decade of history neither of us was eager to revisit directly. I saw Brad last month, I finally offered. His restoration business seems to be thriving. It is. He's actually happy, probably for the first time in his adult life. Melissa twisted her drink slightly. Tyler's doing okay too, though he'd never admit it to you. The detailing service has 3 locations now. And Uncle Robert? Retired to Scottsdale. Still talks about the old days, but less bitterly now. I think he's finally made peace with how things turned out. We stood in awkward silence. 2 women with a complicated shared history now occupying very different places in life than either could have predicted 10 years earlier. You know, Melissa said finally, I've never said this, but you were right. About all of it. The business, Dad's management, our attitudes. We were headed for collapse even if you hadn't stepped in. I just couldn't see it then. The admission clearly cost her something in pride, making it all the more meaningful. This wasn't the entitled, mocking Melissa, who had orchestrated social media humiliation campaigns. This was someone who had finally gained enough self-awareness to acknowledge painful truths. We all have blind spots, I replied, choosing generosity over vindication. Especially when it comes to family dynamics and expectations. She glanced toward the stage where my award sat. Still, you built something remarkable out of what we nearly destroyed. That takes more than business acumen. It takes values, I said simply. Something I learned from my father, though I didn't fully appreciate his wisdom until later. As Melissa drifted back to her table, I found myself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had brought me to this moment. The Turners had intended their mockery to put me in my place, to reinforce the hierarchy they believed in, one where external symbols of wealth determined a person's value and worth. Instead, they had inadvertently launched me on a journey that proved the emptiness of their entire worldview. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, I caught sight of my reflection in the hotel's ornate lobby mirror. I looked nothing like the uncertain woman who had entered this same building 10 years earlier, desperate for family approval I would never receive. That desperate need for validation had been replaced by a quiet confidence born of building something meaningful on my own terms. Outside, the valet brought my car around. As I slipped into the driver's seat, I noticed a familiar vehicle several spaces away, a meticulously maintained Toyota, almost identical to the one I had driven for so many years. Its owner, a young woman in business attire, approached it with the practical satisfaction of someone who understood that true value wasn't determined by others' perceptions. I smiled to myself, feeling the perfect symmetry of the moment. What had begun with mockery in this very parking lot had come full circle, transforming not just my life but the lives of everyone connected to that moment, my cousins, my employees, even the industry we worked in. Some people learn their most important lessons from success. Others, like the Turners, learn them from failure. But the wisest learn from observing both, extracting principles that transcend immediate circumstances to reveal deeper truths about what truly matters in building a life of genuine meaning and worth. 15 years had passed since that life-changing moment in the hotel parking lot. Wright Luxury Automobiles had grown from 3 struggling dealerships in Southern California to a respected network of 22 locations across the Western United States. Our business model, once dismissed as idealistic and unsustainable, was now being studied in business schools and emulated by competitors desperate to adapt to changing consumer expectations. On this particular morning, I stood in my office reviewing architectural renderings for our newest project, not another dealership, but the Wright Center for Automotive Education. The $20 million facility would offer technical training, business ethics courses, and apprenticeship opportunities focused on the rapidly evolving electric vehicle market. The contractors need final approval on these modifications, Marcus said, pointing to several highlighted areas on the blueprints. Now my chief of staff, after 15 years of loyal service, he had developed an uncanny ability to anticipate challenges before they materialized. The solar array expansion makes sense, I noted, but I'm concerned about reducing the classroom spaces to accommodate it. The engineers believe we can reconfigure rather than reduce. These alternative layouts maintain the same student capacity, while improving energy efficiency. As we discussed the options, Diane appeared at the door, her expression suggesting news that couldn't wait. At 67, she had officially retired 3 years earlier, but remained as chair of our charitable foundation, overseeing the distribution of resources to community initiatives. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's something you need to know immediately. Robert Turner passed away last night." The news landed with unexpected weight. Despite our complicated history, Uncle Robert had been a constant presence in my life. First as the intimidating patriarch of the Turner Empire, then as an adversary during the acquisition, and eventually as a reluctant consultant who had gradually come to respect what I'd built from the ruins of his business. "His attorney called this morning," Diane continued. "Apparently there are some specific requests regarding the funeral arrangements that involve you." I nodded, processing this information. "I'll call him right away. Marcus, can you clear my way? Schedule for Thursday and Friday? I assume the service will be then." The attorney, Philip Goldstein, had represented Uncle Robert for over 30 years, through business expansions, the financial collapse, and the restructuring that followed. His voice carried the formal compassion of a man accustomed to navigating family dynamics in times of grief. "Ms. Wright, thank you for returning my call so promptly. I'm contacting you regarding several matters related to Robert's passing. First, he requested specifically that you speak at his service. This was unexpected. While our relationship had thawed considerably over the years, we had maintained a careful distance. "Did he indicate why?" I asked. "He left a sealed letter for you that might explain his reasoning. The other matter concerns his will. There are provisions that directly involve you, which we should discuss in person before the funeral." That evening, I found myself reflecting on the complex legacy of Robert Turner as I drove home. The sun was setting over the Pacific, casting golden light across the coastline. I'd chosen a home in La Jolla with a view of the ocean, not in the ostentatious neighborhood where the Turners had once lived, but in a quieter area known for its artistic community and environmental consciousness. My phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was my mother. "I just heard about Robert," she said, her voice carrying the complex emotions that came with losing a former brother-in-law who had been both family and antagonist. "How are you feeling about it?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "It's complicated." "Life usually is," she observed. "Will you be speaking at the service?" Apparently that's what he wanted. His attorney has a letter for me that might explain why. My mother was silent for a moment. "You know, your father always believed Robert would eventually recognize his mistakes. He said his brother had good instincts buried under all that pride and ambition." "Dad was more generous in his assessment than I would have been," I noted. "He understood Robert better than most. They were raised with the same values after all. Your father just chose to honor them, while Robert thought he could find shortcuts." She paused. "Whatever's in that letter, I hope it gives you some closure." 2. Days later, I found myself in Goldstein's elegantly appointed office in La Jolla, accepting a heavy cream envelope with my name written in Uncle Robert's distinctive handwriting. The attorney excused himself discreetly, giving me privacy to read. The contents. Samantha, the letter began. If you're reading this, I've finally run out of time to make amends properly. I've asked Philip to arrange for you to speak at my funeral because you, more than anyone, understood what I built and what I lost, and why it happened. When you took control of Turner Motors 15 years ago, I viewed it as the ultimate betrayal. It took me years to recognize it for what it truly was, the necessary consequence of my own failures. Not just business failures, but failures of character and judgment that affected everyone around me, especially my children. You rebuilt what I nearly destroyed, but more importantly, you created something I never could, a business founded on integrity rather than appearances. The hardest lesson of my life was realizing that my brother James, your father, had been right all along about what truly matters in business and in life. In my will, I've designated a portion of my estate to establish a scholarship program for underprivileged youth interested in automotive careers, to be administered through your education center. It seems fitting that whatever positive legacy I might have should be connected to the company name you restored to respectability. I also ask one personal favor. The vintage Mercedes in my garage, the first luxury car I ever sold, which I later repurchased, belongs in your company's heritage collection. It represents both the beginning of Turner Motors and, in your hands, a reminder of how far Wright Automobiles has come. You won once by being underestimated. Your greatest achievement was proving that victory didn't have to mean becoming what you defeated. With respect and belated admiration, Robert Turner. I sat with the letter for several minutes, absorbing its unexpectedly vulnerable contents. The Robert Turner I had known for most of my life would never have admitted such failings or acknowledged another's superior approach. This posthumous candor revealed a man who had ultimately found the courage to face uncomfortable truths, too late for real reconciliation, perhaps, but not too late for some measure of personal redemption. The letter brought back memories of the last meaningful conversation I'd had with Uncle Robert, nearly 2 years earlier. He had requested a meeting at his Scottsdale home, where he'd retired, after stepping back from his consulting role with Wright Automobiles. I'd expected a brief social call, perhaps some discussion of industry trends. Instead, I found him in a reflective mood, sitting on his patio overlooking the desert landscape. "Do you know why your father and I really fell out?" he had asked abruptly, after preliminary pleasantries. I shook my head. The brothers' estrangement had predated my professional life, and neither had discussed the specifics with me. "He caught me altering the numbers on financing applications," Robert admitted, his voice matter of fact but his eyes revealing old shame. "Customers who couldn't actually afford the vehicles they wanted. James confronted me, said it would come, back to destroy everything we'd built, said it was predatory." He took a sip of his scotch, staring out at the mountains. "I told him business was business, that everyone in luxury sales did the same. He gave me an ultimatum, clean up our practices or he'd walk away." A bitter smile crossed his face. "I chose the business over my brother, or what I thought was the business. Turns out he was right about everything." That conversation had shifted. Something in our relationship, not toward friendship exactly, but toward a mutual recognition that had been missing before. Now, reading his letter, I understood it had meant even more to him than it had to me. Goldstein returned eventually, explaining the details of the scholarship endowment, a surprisingly generous $5 million fund, and the legal transfer of the vintage Mercedes. As I left his office, the weight of history and family legacy felt simultaneously heavier and more resolved than ever before. "There's one other thing," Goldstein said as I reached the door. Robert left specific instructions about his eulogy. He wanted me to tell you that while he's requesting you speak, he doesn't expect you to sanitize his legacy. His exact words were, "Tell Samantha to be honest. That's what I've come to value most about her approach." The funeral service took place at an exclusive chapel in Rancho Santa Fe, attended by what remained of San Diego's old money social circle, automotive industry figures, and the scattered members of the Turner Wright extended family. Brad had flown in from Phoenix, his restoration business now successful enough to have been featured in several specialty magazines. Tyler had arrived from Newport Beach, his detailing company having evolved into a high-end automotive customization service that had found a profitable niche among tech executives. Melissa managed the event with the polished efficiency of her PR training, though the strain showed in her tired eyes. As I waited for my turn to speak, I observed the dynamics of the gathering. The Turner siblings had each found legitimate success in fields aligned with their actual talents rather than their father's expectations. Their children, my second cousins, now mostly in their teens and early 20s, moved through the crowd with the self-assurance of young people raised with more authenticity and less pretension than their parents had been. When it came time for me to speak, I approached the podium with carefully considered words. This wasn't the place for settling old scores, or even subtly highlighting the contrast between Robert's approach to business and my own. The man deserved a more nuanced remembrance. Robert Turner understood automobiles as few people do, I began. Not just as machines or merchandise, but as aspirations made tangible. He recognized that a car represents something profound in American culture: freedom, achievement, possibility. Where his vision sometimes faltered was in believing that the symbol mattered more than the substance behind it. I glanced at the assembled mourners, noting the varying reactions to my measured assessment. In his final years, Robert demonstrated something more valuable than his earlier success: the capacity to learn, to reassess, to acknowledge when a different approach proved more effective than his own. That kind of humility often comes too late in life, if it comes at all. That he found it at all speaks to a depth of character that wasn't always evident in his more public persona. I shared the story of the vintage Mercedes, how it represented both the beginning of his career and his eventual recognition that vehicles were more than status symbols. They were connections to pivotal moments in people's lives, to memories, and milestones that transcended their material value. Robert's legacy is complex, I concluded. He built something substantial, lost much of it through choices he later came to regret, but ultimately found the wisdom to learn from those very failures. In doing so, he offered a final lesson more valuable than any business strategy: that it's never too late to recognize a better path forward, even if you can't always walk it yourself. The remainder of my brief eulogy balanced respect for Robert's accomplishments with honest acknowledgement of his complexities. When I concluded, Brad approached me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Thank you for that," he said quietly. It was more generous than he probably deserved. "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But there's little value in defining people only by their worst moments or decisions." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, after all these years, I still think about that day in the parking lot. How differently everything might have turned out if we hadn't been such entitled jerks about your car." "I've thought about that too," I admitted, "but I'm not sure it would have changed the fundamental trajectory. Your father's business practices were unsustainable. My values were incompatible with his approach. We were on a collision course regardless of that particular catalyst." Brad's expression turned reflective. "Maybe. But that moment revealed character. Yours and ours. Dad always taught us that appearances were everything. That looking successful was more important than actually building something sustainable." He gestured toward the chapel where his father's memorial service had just concluded. "Look where that got us all." We were joined by Tyler, who had matured from the impulsive, entitled young man I remembered into someone with at least the outward appearance of greater self-awareness. "Remember when we used to compete over who had the most expensive car?" he asked Brad, including me in the conversation with a nod of acknowledgement. "And now I spend my days helping people preserve vehicles they actually care about, not just impress with." "Life has a way of teaching the lessons we need most," I observed. Tyler studied me with newfound respect. "You figured that out way before the rest of us. Cost us a family business and 15 years of learning the hard way. Different paths, same destination, I offered diplomatically. After the service, I found myself drawn to the memorial displays. The family had arranged photographs capturing moments from Robert's life. Among them was an image I hadn't seen before. My father and Uncle Robert as young men, standing proudly beside the vintage Mercedes mentioned in Robert's letter. They looked remarkably similar, their expressions reflecting shared excitement and possibility before their paths diverged so dramatically. Melissa appeared beside me, studying the same photograph. "Dad kept that hidden away for years after your father died," she explained. "Too painful, I think. He only put it back on display after you two reached your détente." "They were close once," I observed. "Yes. And then they weren't." She sighed softly. "Family is complicated." "That it is." We stood in companionable silence. Two women who had once been bitter adversaries now united in acknowledging the complex legacy of the man who had shaped both our lives in such different ways. "I heard about your education center," Melissa said, finally. Dad was impressed by the concept, though he'd never have admitted it publicly. That's why he decided to fund the scholarship program. "It was an unexpected gesture," I acknowledged. "Maybe his way of admitting your approach had merit all along." She hesitated, then added, "We're not so different now, you know. My PR firm specializes in reputation management through actual corporate improvement, helping companies align their practices with their stated values. Essentially the business equivalent of what you did with Wright Automobiles." I smiled at the irony. "So you've built a career helping companies avoid making the same mistakes your father made." "Exactly. Though it took me years to recognize that's what I was doing." She shook her head ruefully. "The Turner family legacy. Learning everything the hard way." The reception following the service was held at what had once been the Turner family's lake house, now owned by a tech entrepreneur who had graciously offered the property for the occasion. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself on the deck overlooking the water, momentarily away from the subdued conversations inside. My mother joined me, linking her arm through mine in a gesture of quiet support. "Your father would have been proud of how you handled today," she said. "Both the speech and the way you've interacted with Robert's children." "It's easier when there's nothing left to fight about," I replied. "We've all moved beyond what happened 15 years ago." "Have you, though?" she asked gently. "Or have you just found a way to make peace with it?" Her question made me consider more deeply how the events of that period had shaped not just my career, but my entire approach to life. The mockery in that hotel parking lot, followed by the discovery of the Turner family's business vulnerabilities, had crystallized values that might otherwise have remained theoretical. "Both, I think," I answered finally. "What happened taught me that substance always outlasts style, that genuine value survives when artifice collapses. That's become the foundation of everything I've built." She squeezed my arm affectionately. "Your father said almost exactly the same thing when he walked away from Robert's business all those years ago. Some lessons run in the blood, I suppose." 1 month after the funeral, I stood in our company's newly expanded heritage collection, watching as Robert's vintage Mercedes was carefully positioned between a contemporary electric luxury sedan and my original Toyota, which we'd reacquired and restored as a symbol of our founding ethos. The juxtaposition of these three vehicles told our company's story more eloquently than any corporate history could. The Mercedes represented the traditional luxury market with its emphasis on exclusivity and status. The Toyota embodied the practical values and financial prudence that had allowed me to seize opportunity when it appeared. And the electric sedan symbolized our future, innovative, sustainable, and forward-looking, while still honoring the craftsmanship and quality that had always defined true luxury. A tour group of business students entered the gallery, guided by our corporate historian. I stepped back, listening as she explained the significance of each vehicle to Wright Automotive's evolution. "And this Toyota," she noted, gesturing to my old car, belonged to our founder, Samantha Wright. When her cousins mocked her for driving such a practical vehicle, they didn't realize she was managing her finances responsibly while they were leveraging themselves to project an image of success they hadn't earned. When their family business faced financial collapse, she had the resources and knowledge to step in and transform it into what eventually became Wright Luxury Automobiles. A young woman raised her hand. Was that her plan all along? To take over their business? No, I interjected, stepping forward to join the conversation. There was no master plan, just different values and priorities that proved more sustainable in the long run. The students looked startled to find themselves suddenly addressing the company's founder and CEO. Their professor quickly introduced me, and their questions flowed eagerly about business ethics, growth strategies, industry disruption, and leadership philosophy. What's the most important lesson you learned from transforming a failing business? One student asked. I considered the question carefully, aware that my answer would shape these future business leaders' thinking. That true success isn't measured by what you acquire or achieve, but by whether you've remained faithful to your core values in the process. The Turners built a business that looked impressive but couldn't withstand scrutiny or challenges because it was founded on appearance rather than substance. Another student, more skeptical than his classmates, raised his hand. But couldn't someone argue that your initial motivation was revenge? That you wanted to take over their business because they humiliated you? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times over the years. The catalyst was personal, certainly, I acknowledged. Their mockery revealed character flaws that made me look more closely at their business practices. But the decision to acquire their dealerships was ultimately strategic, not emotional. I saw an opportunity to transform something falling into something sustainable by applying different principles. I gestured toward the 3 vehicles in our display. Each of these represents a different approach to business and life. The Mercedes was sold as an exclusive status symbol, available only to a select few. My Toyota represented practical value that served its purpose reliably without pretension. Our electric model combines luxury craftsmanship with environmental responsibility and technological innovation. The lesson, I continued, is that lasting success comes from creating genuine value, not just projecting an image of it. My cousins couldn't see that 15 years ago. They judged worth by appearance rather than substance, and that fundamental misconception eventually cost them their family business. After the tour concluded, I remained behind in the Heritage Gallery, contemplating the 3 vehicles that charted the course of my unexpected career. From the humiliation of being mocked for my practical Toyota to leading a company that had redefined an industry's approach to ethics and customer relationships, it had been an extraordinary journey, what my cousins could never have understood. On that fateful day in the hotel parking lot was that they weren't mocking my failure. They were revealing their own fundamental misunderstanding of what truly constitutes success. In laughing at my old car, they demonstrated the hollow values that would ultimately lead to their downfall. The final irony was that in the end, everyone had found their way to more authentic versions of themselves. Brad, with his restoration, business, reconnecting with the craftsmanship that luxury vehicles were originally known for. Melissa with her PR firm helping companies align actions with stated values. Even Tyler had eventually found legitimate success in a field suited to his detail-oriented perfectionism. As I prepared to leave, my phone chimed with a notification. The Wright Center for Automotive Education had received its final building permits. Construction would begin next month, and the first class of students, including recipients of the Robert Turner Memorial Scholarships, would be admitted the following year. That evening, I drove home in my hybrid, not the most expensive vehicle in our inventory by any measure, but one that perfectly suited my needs and values. As I passed the spot where the Grand Del Mar Hotel stood, where this journey had begun 15 years earlier with mockery and humiliation, I felt a profound sense of completion. Life had come full circle, transforming mockery into meaning, conflict into contribution, and a simple Toyota into the symbolic foundation of an enterprise dedicated to proving that integrity and success weren't just compatible, they were inseparable. What greater victory could there be than that? As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a package propped against my front door. Inside was a small, exquisitely crafted model of my old Toyota, accompanied by a note in Melissa's handwriting. A reminder of where we all started and how far we've come. Some lessons take longer to learn than others. Thank you for teaching. Ours with more grace than we deserved. I placed the model on my mantle, next to a photograph of my father, the man whose values had shaped mine, whose wisdom I had embraced even when the Turners rejected it. In that quiet moment of reflection, I understood that the true inheritance he had left me wasn't financial, but philosophical. The unshakable belief that genuine success comes not from what you possess or project, but from what you build and how you build it. The Turners had learned that lesson the hard way. I had learned it through my father's example. And now, through the Wright Center and the businesses we had each created from the ashes of Turner Family Motors, we would pass that wisdom on to a new generation, ensuring that what had begun with mockery would end with meaning that extended far beyond any of us. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.